Hey everybody, my name is McLean and welcome to my live stream. For this live stream, I'm going to be focusing on the glove portion of the Amazing Spider-Man 1 costume from the, uh, um, the movie back in 2012, the first Mark Webb and Andrew Garfield. Um, Basically, this tutorial is about the assembly of these red and blue pieces. So I've got the in assembly version here, and then this is how it looks when you get it as a print. So you've got this kind of crazy looking blue piece, and then an equally crazy looking red piece to go along with it. And if anyone has moderate sewing experience, this might be a little terrifying the first time you look at it because it's just got so many corners and curves and crazy things like that. So I could see how a seamstress or anyone with a little bit of experience might look at that and kind of turn the other way. But there's a pretty simple way to make it happen, and it's I think pretty close to what they actually did for the movie for these really crazy details. There are so many corners and curves and things that if you're to try to kind of sew them together in the way you do typically, it'd be really difficult to do that. So I'm going to go through the process of how you kind of get it from this to this to the more patched completed version. Basically, it's just a matter of trimming all of the red components so that there's just a little bit of this red edge along each of the pieces, red margin, I guess, and then gluing it with either you can do a sort of applique glue, or you can also use puff paint. I just used puff paint for this one. I put red puff paint underneath the edges, a little bit away from the edges, so it's not gonna smudge out when you press it down. It's got to be a little bit in, but puff paint's actually pretty good because it's already covered in puff paint, so it's just kind of more of the same for the fabric. And then you have to make sure that after you've glued the red portions on top of the blue and everything's pretty sturdy and stable, you go over and sew each of these red edges with thread, kind of the way you'd sew on a patch. And you have to make sure that you kind of are stretching the fabric as you sew, just a little bit. It doesn't have to be a lot of stretch, but just a little bit. Because when you stretch the fabric as you sew, that gives the stitch itself a little bit of stretch. It'll still contract back to where the fabric originally goes, but that gives it the ability to stretch just a little, ever so slightly. Because the glove doesn't need to stretch too much. There are areas where it's able to stretch enough for the ways it's used. So you don't have to worry too much about those being stretched stitches, but you do have to sew it down because the puff paint or like an applique glue isn't going to be enough to actually put that down well enough. I'll show you another. This is the actual Amazing Spider-Man costume. This is a screenshot from, I think, the trailer or something, but this shows you just exactly what you're kind of going for as far as the effect on these gloves. And there isn't too much else that this kind of technique is used for, but you can use it for some things, because the really good thing about this technique is that it adds a little bit of dimension to the red over the blue areas. You can actually see the thickness of the red parts on top of the blue parts, and that kind of gives it its own layer of depth as opposed to a more standard sewing seam, which is intended to be invisible. This is actually a zipper right here, but a standard sewing seam, like what goes around the fingers, is not meant to be noticed as much as like this layering aspect does. So the reason I picked this as the first sort of technique to learn is because either the seamstress could do this, or more likely, if you've puff painted the whole suit and you're going for a really accurate suit, you should probably do this. The blue portions have a little bit of a color variation. You can see there that it looks like it's kind of stained, or there's kind of a shadow. That's exactly where the red parts are supposed to go and where you're supposed to glue it. The reason why it's not that clearly defined is in case you're off a little bit. I didn't want the marks to be visible in any way. So it's pretty easy to just go ahead, trim all of the non red components off. Although I'll be really explicit here with these instructions because it gets complicated. You're only trimming along these thicker red lines. So around here where it's a normal outline, you need to just trim off the edge. You can see here, I just went straight off the edge because now this red piece picks up the sewing that's going to be done. So it has to kind of transition smoothly in that sense. So you're not just trimming everything of the red components. So that's really why I'm addressing this video first, is it's a little complicated. Just these gloves themselves are a little complicated. But hopefully with this video and a little bit of you watching me, glue and sew these things, you'll be able to do it yourself or whoever is detailing the suit. So yeah, so I want to go ahead and just jump straight in to sort of this detailing process of gluing these things together. Oh yeah, sorry, I also, same thing from the last stream. It sucks because Napat is just mentioning stuff from the end of the end of Homecoming, which it sucks that it's a spoiler and we can't talk about it because it's pretty cool. But yeah, I unfortunately have to block him if he's going to continue to talk about that. Yeah, catching up on comments here. Yeah, Matt just mentioned he's used liquid stitch, which I imagine is a sort of clear like applique glue. The biggest thing is if you're going to use like a clear glue, it's just got to be flexible. I can imagine that there might be some glues out there that aren't flexible. And also, I recommend testing it. So making sure that your glue doesn't soak through your material and kind of become visible on the other side. The good thing about puff paint is you can see here, this is puff painted on the front. So you can see exactly how much puff paint basically soaks through. It only leaves a little bit of an impression kind of the shape on the other side, but it doesn't pool and really make it splotchy on the other side, which makes it a pretty ideal glue for this. And really when you're gluing this stuff down, it's only to get it to the point where you're sewing it. If you're not sewing it yourself, that's probably going to be your seamstress or whoever is sewing it, but you're only making it to that step. You just really have to communicate that it has to be sewn. Each of these red lines has to be sewn, because if you forget even one, I guarantee you'll be wearing the suit and eventually it'll pop. That glued bit will pop. Okay, so without further ado, go ahead and cut this. Actually, when I'm actually doing work, I prefer that POV format I do, because it's easier, I think, when you guys can kind of see what I see when I'm working. The bad thing about those POV videos, though, that I do with my phone is that it's kind of dependent on my phone's battery, and eventually my phone's battery dies. So I'm trimming this out just outside of this red outline. I want to get rid of everything outside of that. I don't want any of the detail. Again, I'm just going straight out. So I just took out that middle portion there. And this is for the palm portion. Yeah. So basically this portion just goes right on top of this blue portion. And then you glue it, and then you sew it together. And so it's really good because it shows, it has that depth and dimension that the actual suit has. So, that's my goal here with this video, is just, if you're trying to do this suit with as high a level of detail, this is the way I found to do it. Typically with dye sublimation, you don't usually have to worry about different colored stuff like this coming together, because it's easy to just print every color on white, and then all of this would be just printed together. And I used to do that for the suits. But the problem is that when you print on white, the colors kind of fade a little bit. And so by printing on pink and blue here, colors are a lot more kind of rich, saturated. The actual movie did screen printing, I think. And that would be a probably more ideal way to get the effect, but nothing beats the low cost and easy accessibility of puff painting. So that's essentially just the cutting components of the red. If you have a fine detail area, I like to use little detail tweezers like this, and I use these only for thread and fabric, a lot like my fabric scissors, because you just want these to be as sharp as possible. Having these super sharp made it really easy to cut all of these different lines and everything. Thanks, Ash. It's fun to have you watching. I can remember when all this started. We all got into making these suits years and years ago. Okay. And Kyle asked, do you puff paint everything by hand, or do you have a machine that helps out with it? Typically, when people are doing things like puff painting, industrial, it's screen printing. Screen printing is the machine way to do this kind of raised detail, because you can print out the detail and then you print it in, you get it into a screen through emulsifiers, and then you have this screen on top of your fabric that you scrape your dye along, and then when you pull the screen away, the dye is only, the ink or dye is only where the screen had holes in it, where your emulsifier took out the screen material. So basically all of this material that you see that's raised would be scraped along over the screen would be removed, and then this would be put under a heat source, like a really big oven or a press or something, and that would make the ink puff out and get a kind of dimension. And so that's kind of why that's the industrial version of that. You could have a machine that conceivably could puff paint, but I think it would be difficult to get it to look clean. I think you'd have a lot of like spillage and like lines, and it would just be hard to get the machine to not be messy like that, I think. Okay, cool. Wonderful Aodeji asked, do you know how to sew? Yes, I do know how to sew. And that's basically what I'll be doing over the next 2 or 3 days here. I'm going to be sewing all of the components of the amazing Spider-Man 1 costume, because I need a comprehensive sort of tutorial series on putting that together. So this is the first video I chose to tackle. You know, I apologize that these videos are always kind of long and rambling. It's best to kind of think of them as like podcast sort of tutorials where, you know, I try to get as much information as I can think to get into these streams. And there's a little bit of discussion and stuff when I'm, you know, kind of doing different stuff, like when I'm working on a piece. I'll discuss different things. So the next bit of information, oh, that's a good idea, Winter Boy. I didn't mention in my last stream how many bottles of puff paint to use. Typically, you're going to need like 2 or 3 bottles per color. And it's usually better to have more than less. I think it's pretty frustrating when you're needing to go to the store to get more bottles of puff paint, especially if they're sold out of the color that you need or anything like that. So it's always a good idea to get more puff paint than you need than less. And that kind of is true for most stuff with this making stuff. Okay, so I'm continuing on with the gluing process, and I'm going to be using this puff paint to actually glue the red piece onto the blue. Hi, Captain Red Ducky. I noticed you. There you go. He was complaining about not getting noticed. Yeah, so next up with putting this red part onto the blue is you want to get it lined up. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a dark, I had it all lined up and I just pull it off. There's sort of a dark coloration where the red part goes over, basically like a shadow on the piece that just tells you basically where it needs to go. And if you're off a little bit, it's not that big of a deal. And these pieces are also marked on the back. You know, the outline is already marked on the back with Sharpie. I mentioned that in the last stream, kind of the intro to dye sublimation. But if you have a pattern, I have my designs so that you're able to go through on the back and mark it out with Sharpie so that when the person sewing is actually sewing it together, they can see the outline in front of them. They don't have to use the measurement to the edge or anything, and they have really, you know, concise areas of where like the points of the fingers are supposed to be. So that's already on the fabric before I've started gluing or anything like that. Yeah, I wish I could discuss Homecoming more and not have it be spoilery. I need to do like a Homecoming discussion stream. I wanted to do one of those this weekend, but I didn't know if everyone had seen it yet or not. We'll try to keep it spoiler free in the comments, please, for people who might not have seen it yet. But yeah, I really like, basically, I'll talk about it later once I'm kind of getting back just to work and I've finished covering like how you do the main parts of this. Okay, so everything's all marked, I've got it all cut, and I'm getting ready to glue. What I do to get everything secured and everything is the same way you puff paint. You're basically pinning, you can use push pins. Push pins are probably better for actual puff painting, but for this process, I'm using pins to keep the pieces down and the glue all steady. And this is a good way to just make sure that everything stays down while the puff paint dries. But you can go ahead and initially pin it once you've got it in place. And one helpful thing is the outlines will basically perfectly match up here. The 1/2 inch clearance on the edges. There you go. Just have to make sure it sits perfectly flat. And this will be more important while actually gluing. It's in there. Okay. So now that I have the front secured up there, it's basically anchored, and I can kind of get access to the bottom side and be pretty sure that it's still in a generally good position. Here's probably what I should do. This will keep it from spinning around at all. If I pin right here. Okay, so I'm gonna go segments at a time. I'm not going to glue it all just at once and try to lay it down flat, because then it's really difficult to grab and try to position and everything. And you'll find that once you've put puff paint on the edges of the piece, it really is difficult to kind of like get a good hold on it when you're trying to position it. So I'm going to go ahead and start applying this puff paint here. I like to, when I'm first starting up a puff paint job, I like to start it in a paper towel. Shake the bottle so that all of the air, you know, comes to the top. It's not right near the nozzle. But I like to get it coming out. There we go. So now it won't be scary and potentially a blowout situation where it pops out. And it doesn't take a lot, just enough that it's bonding the two layers together. I do both sides because it's going to be hard to get into the inner side if the top side is glued. So now I'm going to go ahead and start the gluing process here. Don't want it to touch the fabric at all. Being really cautious about that. It wants to. And like I said earlier, it's difficult to, you know, grab the edges for positioning because it has puff paint on it. And you want to be really conscious in this part about the possibility of getting puff paint, you know, on your hands or anything like that. So, pinning very close to where the puff paint is, if not like right straight through it, because I want it to be perfectly pressed down onto the fabric. You don't want to use a million pins because you don't want to tear it apart and have a bunch of little holes and stuff in it. Kind of smudged a little bit of red there. Oops. Okay, so now that the back is, cemented, I can take these front pins off. To answer the puff paint question, I've gone through a lot of bottles of puff paint. So I'm getting the whole back edge here. You might not be able to see it quite as well. Okay, so I had a little bit of the paint kind of coming out in a too thick spot, like kind of a little pile of paint. And if you push down on that, it might kind of smudge out all over the place. So I kind of spread it around with the tip of the applicator. Just make sure it never is in too thick of a spot so that when you press down, it kind of, spreads out in too much too fast and comes out the edge. And the other thing is, you kind of want to keep moving the pins around as it's drying, because otherwise you might only be gluing in the areas where the pins are keeping it down. I got knocked. And keep in mind, all we're doing is we're just, this isn't for full-time use of the suit. It's just kind of gluing it down for the sake of the next part, which is just the patchwork. All right. So this piece is ready to dry for a little while. All right, okay, so that one's all glued and just needs to be sewn down. Looking at comments. That's cool. Yeah, a lot of people have done puff paint suits these days. Puff paint is really just a great way to do it, because if you can see on this piece I'm working on, it's just so high detailed. Looks really awesome. All right, so now I'm just gonna flip that around, kind of clear my workspace here a little bit. Now I'll do a thumb piece. With the thumb, because the thumb is just a straight line, I have done it in the past where I just glued them kind of the way you typically glue a seam, where you just put the faces together and then you glue it like that, or sew it like that, so that they come together just like a normal seam would. But if we look at the movie version again, if you look at the thumb, I'm pretty sure it's got that edge, the same kind of patchwork edge on it. So I'm gonna go ahead and do it the same style. This is just a straight line. So you want to be as precise as you possibly can be. All right. So this one will be easy to glue because it's not a crazy shape at all. I love the comment aspects of these streams. It's awesome that sometimes, I forget about the comments, but so many of you guys have your own experience and your own advice to offer that people find the help they need. It's like a helpline, hotline. Okay, so I just put a little line of glue, or not even glue, puff paint on there, and basically just going to go ahead and get that as lined up as I possibly can. I'm going to line it up so that it's easier for me. I can see an outline. You guys probably can't see it. And so I'm gonna, kind of pull this tight a little bit when I pin it so that I'm sure that they're kind of flat and pulling against each other. All right. So really, the only thing about this gluing is that you just don't want to put so much on that it, squishes out from underneath, or that it soaks into the fabric and is visible from the top. But other than that, it just needs to pin the fabric in position to get you there. But yeah, it makes a really cool effect of the fabric being layered on top. And I mentioned it before, but that's something you could apply to other things, like the homecoming suit. I know has parts where it looks like the red is kind of on top of the blue. It kind of looks like there's a little bit of a layer and thickness to the suit, which is kind of one of the cool aspects that it has. Yeah, this is a good way to get that effect. The game butler asked if I plan on doing Spidey's homemade suit, maybe the mask. I might do the homemade mask. I like the way they used that in the movie. If anything, I'm more interested in. Well, don't want to get spoilery. It's hard to discuss it without being spoilery, but other things in the movie are more interesting to me. Without being spoilery to everyone, even though I'm sure most of us have seen the movie. Yeah, random gamer. I've got a video. I can see. That's why, for the most part, there's the camera. I should be looking more at the camera, but sometimes I kind of have that problem where I'm looking at the screen and how everything is framed and how you guys are able to see, what's on, what I'm working on. Yeah, so now that I've got these parts glued, I'm actually going to pin this a little bit more because the puff paint, it puts the pieces together pretty well, but it doesn't have that kind of glue tendency to like grip the two pieces together. The two pieces need to kind of contact each other pretty well. or the puff paint doesn't do the job. But really, again, it's only there to hold it in place while the sewing process happens, and then to be stretchy later. Yeah, the Vulture's mask was really cool. I like that. It's just kind of like a commando sort of thing. I liked everything about the Vulture and Shocker and Scorpion about Homecoming. Sorry if you guys haven't seen Homecoming, you should probably go be watching that rather than watching my streams. Or if it hasn't come out in your country, I don't know if that's the case, but sorry if that's the case. But I'll try to say when I'm going to do spoilers so you can mute it or plug your ears. Okay, so I've done that part. The next part is basically the sewing component. So another reason why I'm tackling this one first is because with these red and blue colored prints, these prints that are separated into red and blue colors, that's probably weird. In these red and blue colored prints, you have to assemble a lot of the pieces that normally on a dye sub. So this is a normal dye sub printed on white fabric. You can see underneath that it's white fabric that it's printed on. Normally, the red and the blue stuff is all just printed at the same time. So you can see that it's just an arm piece. This is all just one long arm piece that has all of these red and blue parts just already printed together. And that's one of the greatest advantages of dye sublimation, is that you can just get all of that stuff at once, and you don't kind of have to go through this process here. It's just that this is far from accurate to the actual movie. And you know, this ends up, you know, working way, you know, a lot closer to the movie, and the colors just end up being a lot better. So it's good to have the information on how to do this if you need to do it. But for a lot of purposes here, just regular dye sublimation is a great way to go about it, and much simpler too. It reduces the complexity by a lot. So I'll work here on my already completed Spider-Man's gonna help out here. Let's do that. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay. So yeah, I've got the already glued portion here, and the next step is just going to be sewing along each of these edges and applying the red parts onto the blue like it was a patch. Yeah, Winter Boy, to answer your question, sometimes I do a wrist zipper that goes, basically, if you think of how this glove ends up working on an arm, the wrist zipper just goes up in this area here. You just install the invisible zipper here. That's a little bit more difficult here just because there's so many different layers and thicknesses and stuff that it'd be tough to successfully install an invisible zipper. So I don't think I'm actually going to put one on there. If Fernando's watching and he really wants one, he should chime in at some point. But for now, I'm thinking it probably doesn't need it. But that's, well, I got the zippers, so I'm kind of on the fence on whether or not I'm going to put the arm zippers on there or not. But yeah, so next step for me is just to switch out my colors of thread here. And I mentioned in my last stream, dual duty heavy thread. This is, you don't have to use the dual duty brand, but this is thick, heavy polyester thread that it's designed to just be really strong. Typical, you know, most normal threads will break with a little bit of strength, and you kind of want that, because if you were to sew like a neckline with this kind of thread and it was too tight, you'd want it to break before it like strangled someone. But with this, it's a little stronger, and it's designed to not break under a lot of tension. So don't design it as like a choker necklace like I just showed you. But yeah, so you get that loaded up into your sewing machine. Already have red thread in the bottom, that's convenient. Load up the sewing machine. Oh, it has no feet. Let's see, what's gonna be the best angle here? Maybe like that. Put the feet back on. Dual duty, yeah. I said that earlier, that's funny. If you want to get my file, I'm currently not selling prints, although I'm thinking of offering them on my website. It's just, it would be kind of under the condition that I can only really sell them once I get a certain amount of orders, so you'd have to like potentially place an order for a print and then wait until enough other people placed an order, because that's one of the difficult things about finding a company that does printing on colored fabric. Is they, in order to print on colored fabric, they have to stop their whole production. They have to switch out the white fabric they usually use with the colored fabric that you have to supply, unless that's a feature they offer. You have to supply the fabric on a roll, and they have to stop everything, load it into their heat press, and it's a lot of work and hassle for them. So the place that I get it done, they require that there be at least 100 yards per color. So that means, most suits only have about 4 or 5 yards of fabric in the dye sublimation. And if you're splitting it up between red and blue, then that means that there's only 2 to 2.5 yards of red and 2 to 2.5 yards of blue. And so you have to get a lot of prints ready to order before you actually meet that minimum threshold. So that's always kind of what has stopped me from just directly selling like that. But I do want to do make it a little easier, because I know that it'd be nice for everyone to have this higher quality fabric. Trying to find the best angle here. The problem is this little webcam is not the best at focusing here. That's probably gonna be the best. So I'm just going around the edges here and stopping at the corners. I don't want a super long stitch, but I'm going to stop at the corners and then pick the foot up, rotate it, keep going, stop at the corner, rotate, keep going. Oh, there, it finally focused a little bit. And then, just go along the edge. You don't want to be too close to the edge, because then it might not, you run the risk of going off and missing, and then also the fabric can kind of unravel and come apart. So you want to be kind of inside the fabric a little bit. We'll look at the reference one more time before I start sewing here. So once again, I'm basically starting right here on this component here, this finger bit, and it goes down to this corner, goes to another corner, little shark fin here, inside of here, and then down. So that's what I'll be sewing right now. And it looks, the web line is pretty thick. So what I probably will do for the sake of strength is do each edge twice. I'll do one line, and then I'll go through and do another line right next to it to kind of just give it this thick quilted edge that it has. remember, I said earlier, you want to stretch the fabric a little bit because that gives the stitch itself a little bit of stretch as well. All right. So if this thing decides to focus, maybe, there we go. Starting off away from the piece a little bit so that I have some lead into the stitch a little here. All right. Make sure everything's good. Okay. Some bar tack. So I know that the next stitch is going to go a little too far. I'm kind of just about to the corner, but my next stitch would go over the corner. So what you can do is when you're kind of in the middle of the stitch and it's about to go, because when it's going down, that's typically when the feet start to pull it back. You can hit the reverse right at that moment and it will keep it kind of in place. It'll kind of negate that momentum. So now I'm right on that corner where I want to be. So now the needle is down in there. I'm going to go ahead and lift the foot, and now I can freely rotate the fabric piece, and I'm going to get it lined up with that edge and then put it back down. And actually what I'm going to do really fast is I didn't do one thing I mentioned in the last stream. I don't know if I have that still around, but oh, there it is. These Armor All car interior kind of protectant wipes. I mentioned it in the last stream, but they're really good to just kind of hydrate and kind of lubricate the puff paint. Because when you're sewing puff paint like this, it's really sticky. It's sticky, tacky stuff, and so it can be difficult to get the bottom, of the feet of your sewing machine to kind of glide over it the way you need to. Like already, I'm kind of having it sticking and resisting a little bit. But if you go ahead and use this car interior wipe, it gives you a little bit of kind of like a lubrication for the foot of the sewing machine going forward on the puff paint. And sewing puff paint spandex like this is a lot like sewing kind of like a stretchy vinyl. The puff paint really adds that much of a, thickness to the spandex. Almost to the corner, but there we go. So I go ahead and rotate again to do the shark fin component of the finger. Game Butler asked about the MCU moving lenses. We'll get to those down the line. Basically, I've just got such a big to-do list, including this, that I can't get to the MCU quite yet. So, still have to wait a little while, but it'll happen eventually. Still only a month since I finished the working one, so in the grand scheme of things, it's still pretty early on. And there are a lot of people coming up with other ideas for face shells, like really neat, inventive stuff. Oh, gonna reverse, I had it there. And so, that was kind of part of the reason why I didn't just immediately release it last year is you know, then everyone just uses my method and there's no other methods thought of. Or at least it's less likely. You can't say that for sure that they wouldn't come up with other ways, but all right. There we go, right on the corner. So this might just be a blurry mess for you right now, but it gives you the idea. If you're actually having to sit there and sew one of these together, if you're tasked with that, I feel like it will help a lot to have this video footage of me actually doing it, actually sewing each part of this suit. You can just go through, and if you're confused, if you don't know how something works, just go through these videos, and I will get there eventually. I'll deal with that part of the suit at some point. One of the biggest struggles for filming all this, though, is that I don't want it to be like 16 hours of dead time of me, because the biggest thing is that I've got to do this for this side, and then I've got to do it for the other side. I've got to do the arm piece, and then I've got to do the arm piece for the other side. I've got to do the leg piece, got to do the leg piece for the other side. So there's a lot of tedious, repetitive stuff that goes on. So I'm kind of thinking right now that the way I'll do it is I'll tackle each piece as they come, and I'll stream it when I do. And then, like, for instance, for this one, I'll finish, sewing this together, but I'm not necessarily gonna sit there and show you sewing together all of them, or all of the pieces. So there you go. Now you can kind of see that finger part is much more securely, fastened onto the blue part. You're not way less likely to actually have it pop off or fall off in any way, essentially. And it's accurate, the thickness of it is accurate to how the movie, I'll keep going back and forth, but it gets that thickness in there pretty well, that kind of millimeter thickness. And so I go over the edge again, and it gets even more of like kind of this thicker through there. Yeah, glad you guys are able to catch the live streams. Thanks for tuning in, by the way. If you subscribe, if you're not subscribed, if you do subscribe, then you get a little alert when I actually am streaming stuff. So let me see how I can do this here so that you actually can see what I'm doing. You gonna focus? Yeah, I got these cameras specifically for these streams, but they seem to have trouble with the really close-up focusing. Whoa, it's probably sickening. Sorry, that was probably pretty fun. Nice little swing through my apartment. Maybe Spider-Man could help out again. It's just gonna be difficult sewing around it. It's always been pretty difficult deciding how to best film sewing. Sewing has been particularly challenging for filming. All right, let's see if that works. Gonna have to sew around it. This actually reminds me a lot of my my streams where I have my camera attached to my face. All right, thanks for bearing with me, everyone. Eventually I'll just be able to do all of this. It'll just be, kind of easier to know what to do for each situation. All right. So I'm sewing this again for strength and to give it that kind of thicker embroidered edge look. Bump the camera. This looks like a pretty good view. It's not going in and out of focus as much. I want to mention again, because someone just mentioned, they were like, oh, the blue looks 3D. How did you print it like that? This was puffy painted. This was just done with puff paint. Like, here's a bottle of red puff paint right here. And this was done by El Fet, my buddy Fernando. He did all the detailing, and I'm sewing this together for him. Yeah, I'm getting to the point in the stream now where, I've kind of gotten the information out. If this were a more standard tutorial, I'd probably just skip through time to a point where I'm done. Ready for the next part. But I like these live streams. It takes me way too long to film kind of more traditional tutorials. Because I mess up so often that it takes me forever. I have to do a million takes. And so when it comes to actually getting the work done, it is a slow process. So you can see the way that seam looks on the blue underneath, and it's fairly stretchy. I didn't sew too much stretch into it, but the design kind of has stretch built into it. That kind of shark fin design allows it to stretch. So that'll work for on top of the finger. So next up, I'm just going to go ahead and tackle kind of the bulk of the red. Here, this is going to be a longer line of thread for sure. To answer your question, yeah, I would love to go and work with those guys. I've never been very good at networking and meeting the right people. Most people that kind of have any dealings with me at all can kind of attest that it's kind of tough. I'm a scatterbrain. I'm kind of flaky. It just kind of all leads to me just being really bad at networking, and that's kind of always been my crux. I've just been really bad at building relationships with people, and that's with the question that you're asking particularly, have you ever thought of working with DC or Marvel? That's one of the first things they look at, it seems. It's just kind of who do you know? Who can vouch for you? Who do you know? Whereas I kind of put all of my effort into my work, into making my work look good, but it's just not as important as you would think when it comes down to it. It's that old saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And unfortunately, it's pretty true. But this is my attempt to kind of get out there and kind of fix that. You know, these streams are me being a little more social and, you know, kind of getting my thoughts together. Even though if you've watched these streams, they're still pretty shaky and, you know, scatterbrained. But that's just me. Oh, to answer your question, I'd say I like Marvel more. I like more of the topic matter that Marvel gets into. I like X-Men a lot. I like Spider-Man, obviously. And Spider-Man practically is an X-Man. he can exist in the X-Men world, which kind of sucks. When Spider-Man is in the X-Men world, it always kind of devalues him a lot. He's not quite as special when there are a bunch of other superpowered people around, which is kind of one of the problems I had with Homecoming a little bit, but I mean, not even a problem. It just, you know, it kind of changes the nature of Spider-Man when he's not the only one who can do what he does. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think they did a really good job incorporating Spider-Man into the Marvel fold. Really great job making like a 21st century Spider-Man too. But after saying that, if you're like a fan of the old classic Spider-Man, I could see someone, that kind of fan, like hating, really disliking the new Spider-Man movie. Just because it did mess with a lot. It certainly messed with a lot. And it had some really weird stuff. There was one time, I won't be spoilery or anything, but there was one moment in the theater where a lady sitting in front of me with her kids kind of audibly said, "This is a family movie." Because there was just such a sort of bizarre, out of place moment. I don't want to be too spoilery, but it has to do with porn. The fact that porn is brought into the Marvel universe. Because I think the lady said it because literally right after that moment came up in the movie, her little kid looked over to her and said, "What's porn?" Because that's, of course, if a little kid doesn't know what porn is, I'm sure there were a lot of parents having to explain to their kids. And also, once again, not too much of a spoiler, but they said penis more in a Spider-Man movie than I could ever imagine could be uttered in a Spider-Man movie. Although it works because it's a teenage, you know, coming of age movie, and you know, it's him with his friends and stuff. And it's smart from Marvel because Spider-Man is such a popular character with young adolescent men, especially, that you have moments like that, like, you know, saying bad words like that, and it kind of, you know, it makes it risque and kind of like dangerous. So it was really smart of them to do that. But still weird. It's funny. See, the problem, the Game in Asian just said porn is short for popcorn. The problem is then you have the kid that you just said that to going to school and saying that in front of the class because they think it means popcorn and they have some new word. Okay, so back to Sewing Land really fast. I just missed a little bit on the edge there. I went on the outside of the red just a little bit, just enough that it might make a little bit of an edge that pokes up. But the good thing is I'm doing it twice on each edge. So, you know, it really solid, you know, it'll get that when I come back around. And also, if you're off track, when the needle is up, that's when you can kind of gently lift the foot and gently, ever so gently, move it. You don't want to move it a lot, or else you'll get this really kind of jump in your seam. But that put it back on track. Yeah, I really liked Homecoming though. Mainly, I mean, just for the way they did the bad guys. I loved the way they incorporated kind of the technology aspect. Because that's always kind of been a problem I've had with Spider-Man movies when, Spider-Man shows up and then suddenly, all of these crazy supervillains are showing up at the same time, all usually from Oscorp or something like that. It kind of was just great world building incorporated with the Avengers to have like, okay, well, Shocker literally came from that time that Earth was attacked by aliens. I love the way Shocker had the sleeves. I thought that was an awesome shout out to the design of the character. And then when the new guy, well, yeah, I guess I'm getting spoilery. I don't. Is anyone here not seen the movie? Make a comment right now if you haven't seen the movie and you don't want to hear spoilers. I still won't be too spoilery just for people watching it afterwards, but, at least I'll give a little bit of fair warning first. Patrick just asked, why do the Andrew Garfield when, there's the Tom Holland version? That's a fair question. I've definitely been struggling with that recently where, the movie just came out. Homecoming just came out. I know you guys want to see, like, Homecoming suit stuff. But I've needed to do this suit for a long time. And specifically, I've needed to film this video I'm filming right now of how to construct it. Because this is complicated. This suit, patching the red part on top of the blue part for the glove first, is pretty complicated. So I have to film this so that when people get this print, when they have this, stuff in front of them, they know what to do with it. Because I know for a fact that there are a lot of people right now that it's very much, they get all of the pieces and everything, and they just, like, are so scared. Just so many crazy, weird pieces, like what's this thing? If you didn't know what you're doing, this thing's crazy. There are a lot of weird things on this suit. So, I really have to film these videos to make it a little more approachable. And also this stuff applies, you could use this for anything. You could use this for, if you think about like the armor, the shoulder armor for the new Homecoming suit, you could sew it on like this, a very similar way of gluing it first and then kind of sewing around the edges. That would be a good way to get that on. Probably more sturdy than just gluing alone. It's just if you did something like that spanned over like a large area, you'd really want to stretch the fabric while you were sewing. Game Butler, you could conceivably hand sew all of this. It's just I really recommend save up, ask for your birthday, Christmas, get a sewing machine and learn how to do this. Because if you have any interest in doing it, these skills are transferable. Every suit pretty much has a undersuit or something to be sewn together. So being able to sew stuff together is a really good skill to have. I learned to sew basically because I got sick of, relying, back when I was like 13, I got sick of relying on my mom as my seamstress because she didn't really care too much. She kind of had the Halloween costume mentality of just kind of like, whatever. It just needs to be like, for something like this, she'd just kind of throw a couple pieces of blue and red fabric together and call it good enough. And so it would be hard to argue with her and be like, no, it has to be like this. So eventually I just had to learn how to sew. And that's kind of been the same for a lot of processes. So it's hard to go through an intermediary who might not care about the detail, high level detail. So I'm kind of pulling the fabric here. you can kind of, right there, you can see me pulling. That's what I mean by stretching the fabric. So when it's being pulled into the machine, it's being stretched. And what that means is that the stitch itself is stretchy once it is all sewn together. And that's important here because this is a stitch that goes up the length of the wrist and up the length of the arm. So if that wasn't stretching on him, then it would be constrictive. Constricting, maybe, I don't know. All right, that's kind of a corner. Yeah, if you're just tuning in, all of this 3D detail, all of this shiny detail is puff paint done by El Fet Fernando. I should put a link into the description to his page. This is my pattern though. I designed this a few years ago. Basically, a lot of when they're yes, this is a straight stitch. It might be confusing to people because I keep calling it a stretch stitch. So like a stretch stitch would be like a zigzag. You can do a zigzag on this part if you wanted to. I just don't like zigzag stitches because they have a tendency to kind of bunch up the fabric if your tension settings aren't perfect. And so I am a really big fan of just using a straight stitch, just a straight kind of one after the other stitch, which most people would think of as not being stretchy or flexible enough to work. But the key is that you're pulling and stretching the fabric. And after you've pulled and stretched the fabric and you sew the fabric while it's stretched, it'll contract and then be able to stretch again, but still just be a straight stitch. So it won't be, zigzag, kind of bumpy and wavy. So this is a very, kind of practical, stretchy, straight stitch that I'm demonstrating here. And then I'm also using extra strong thread that I've gone over a few times. The extra strong thread makes sure that, eventually the thread is going to be pulled. The spandex is always going to be stretchier than the seam is going to get to be. And so the thread will be pulled and the seam will be pulled. But if it's extra strong thread, it's way less likely to actually break. It would take a lot of tension to break. And at that point, you'd want it to break because it might harm you. And when I'm at the beginning and ends there, when I go forward and back, that's called a bar tack. And a bar tack is just going forward and back like that, and it's essentially like tying a knot. It makes it so that your seam doesn't kind of come apart once you're done. And you always want to make sure, there's a cycle to your sewing machine that it goes through in the loop. So it goes down, and then it goes up. It's got a bunch of different little components that are going through their own tasks when it's going through that cycle. You always want to make sure that you get to the top of the cycle, and usually it's this little silver component right here. Show you the top. This little silver component right here. When that pokes down, it goes into the cycle, and then it comes back up. That's when you know you're basically at the top and the beginning of a cycle. And so you want to stop there typically. That's a big mistake that first time sewing students will make. I made a lot when I was first starting out because I didn't quite understand it. And it's hard because then if you pull on the thread when it's in the middle of a cycle like that, it jams the thread up and it's just not in a place to be kind of pulled like that. So you pull out enough excess, then you cut it. And then you have a pretty good stretched, embroidered edge on there for when it all comes together and is put on. So once again, I'm going to tackle that again. I'm going to get it on there. I mean, it's the longest. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the comments here. Kind of catching up. Sometimes it can be difficult deciding which comment thread to jump into. Yeah, it sucks. Well, this is spoilery to the end of Homecoming. I mean, I don't want to ruin it too bad, but don't also get your hopes up. But there is a suit reveal at the end of Homecoming. That is pretty cool. I'm pretty excited about it because basically I was thinking of working on that suit anyway. Oh, whoops! I'm in the middle of a cycle. The suit reveal that they revealed at the end. I was thinking about doing that suit anyway, and then they just went ahead and came out with their official version of it. It looks pretty cool. I like the design that they went with for it. But I won't say any more, just for people who haven't seen it. You may say that you don't care about spoilers, but I still don't want to ruin it. Okay, so I just ended that stitch because it felt like something was pulling a little bit. It still is. My bottom bobbin might be a little messed up right now. Doesn't look like it. Do want to put more of this interior car wipe on there because it makes it a little easier to get over the fabric. Yeah, this is already looking really good. Looks a lot like the movie's kind of embroidered edged finish. It's having some kind of trouble. I wonder what. That's the thing about sewing machines. They're just very finicky machines. When in doubt, it's usually a good idea to check your thread and just kind of rethread everything. Sometimes it can come off of certain components. CAK just said the new suit is the bombastic bagman, which is pretty funny when Peter Parker wears a paper bag on his head. Mr. Toastly asked, I just noticed the comment, do you sell these suits you make? I sell prints and I sell the files for doing dye sublimation prints, and that's why I'm doing this video right now, because this is the assembly stage, you know, of doing the dye sublimation print. And I'm doing the ASM one just because it has extra steps. This is an extra step. Usually your dye sublimation prints will have all these red and blue parts just right next to each other right after printing. There's much less sewing that typically needs to be done. but this is for, you know, really high saturation colors and kind of to get the as movie accurate a look we can get. Okay, it's kind of coming off the edge here again. There we go. Sumo Scrat asked, have you thought of doing this with just a traditional seam? No, I think this would be really hard. The part I'm coming up on, this would all be really, really hard with a traditional seam, especially because this is the finger. So you've got, you know, this is already a pretty tight, thin area. And so that's why the movie suit is very similar to this. They made the same decision when they were making the movie suit. They decided the design had all of these crazy red and blue, you know, if you look at the sketch artwork for Amazing Spider-Man, there are a lot of different early designs. They have the design just crazy, like red colors coming into blue colors and like crazy sections of silver webbing and all these crazy things. So you can tell a lot, like with this design, it was just kind of them trying to bring it down to reality, trying to figure out how you go about having these crazy, intricate red and blue suit components coming together. I've never been a fan of suits that have like the red and the blue fading together. Like the biggest one I can think of is the musical, Spider-Man the musical. It has a lot of areas of the suit where the red kind of fades into the blue and there's kind of like a texture there. I've never really liked that. I don't like that kind of detail. There we go. One of you asked, how do you separate the fingers? That comes later. This is basically, you know, the glove will be sewn the standard way that gloves are sewn. I kind of just go around the outline of the fingers with a thin strip of fabric, and then on the other end of the fabric, you go with the palm piece, and it creates sort of a finger-shaped box. And that's basically how spandex gloves are constructed. And I'll get into that process as well, because it's important that you be able to do that for the construction. Because that's really just for good gloves in general. Because you can either do gloves where the gloves are just the top half and the bottom half sewn together, or you can do it so that there's a strip of fabric in between the top and the bottom half. And that adds a lot of flexibility. It adds a lot of space for your actual fingers. It's definitely the way to do it. It's just probably the most difficult thing to actually sew on the suit. It took me a long time to figure out how to do it. I've actually only done this suit, fully sewn it together once before, but I did it very similar to the way I did this one. And that was years and years ago, so I haven't done this full suit in a long time. But I'm excited to see how it all looks, because I've made a lot of upgrades to the pattern in those years. Captain Red Ducky Supreme asked, how did I get into suit making? A lot like you guys, just really interested in it. When I was like 7, I was super into Spider-Man. I can remember vividly, you know, I wanted the mask so bad. Specifically just like, I wanted to have the Spider-Man mask. And here I am. I've done it. I've made it a couple times. But that's basically how I got into it. And then, when I was a teenager, the Sam Raimi movies came out, and that was the early 2000s, and that was when dye sublimation, what this is, printing the pattern onto fabric like this, that was still state of the art. They basically did use dye sublimation for the Raimi movies. But yeah, just the internet. I mean, you learn a lot just through trial and error. That type of stuff. Oh, I also, since I was just mentioning how I got into suit making, I also went to school for theater at SMU in Dallas. I haven't done theater in a long time because that wasn't really my primary interest, but I learned a lot about construction and sewing and stuff there because they had a big costume shop and a lot of really knowledgeable staff. And their costume shop was also shared with the dance department, so that was a ton of information on sewing spandex and stretch stuff. I learned a lot there. Non-Spider-Man related stuff. I've done Iron Man stuff. I've done Batman stuff. And then I do a lot of other sort of random puppetry and more so back when I was back in school, but I did a lot of puppetry and scene shop stuff like that. So that's always kind of been my focus. And I really enjoy making this stuff, and there's a huge demand and interest in all this. So it's good to be able to share that information. So here's kind of the stretch stitch aspect of it. It's sewn down, but it still has the ability to stretch when it needs to. So that's kind of how that works out. So just a few more lines to go on this glove. Some more Spider-Man vision here. Locust asks, would you have any recommendation for someone who desires to learn how to sew? I feel like most people usually start learning how to sew from someone they know, like grandma or aunt or mom, typically. But if you don't have someone like that who's knowledgeable and kind of good at teaching the basics, there are these streams, which is not the best because I'm not there working with you, which is kind of crucial for sewing, because if you're making mistakes, sometimes you need someone to look over your shoulder and see what specifically you're doing wrong. But if you want to learn, you can try. If you've got a hobby store or a fabric store nearby, a lot of times they'll have classes. They'll teach you how to use sewing machines. They'll try to sell you their sewing machines, usually pretty pricey, but they'll actually have classes. It can be really hard, honestly, to learn how to do kind of specific stuff like machine stretch stitching. I know that there's still a lot I don't even know about, athletic wear and sewing, because I know that, when I look at professionally done, like an Under Armour shirt, it's just so incredible how perfect the seam is. It's perfectly flat. It's perfectly stretchy. And I'm just like, I still just can't, I can't get to that level. My seams are always still kind of wavy, and you know, they get the job done, but sometimes they're the biggest eyesore on the suit. But I'm pretty sure that's because those companies have like the most specialized sewing machines that are just like perfectly specialized to sew what they're supposed to sew. And you know, it's hard if you don't have that. And even to the extent of like stitches, I think they have different machines that do different stitches, and that's kind of crucial. That you have a machine that can do the stitch around, you know, the wrist or around your neck, and then you have a machine that can do stitches, you know, on the rest of the garment. So it's hard to reach that level for sure. Yeah, sergers for sure on some of the more, you know, on like stitches that go, you know, from the neck down to the arm. They definitely use sergers and stuff. It's just difficult because it'd be hard to use a serger for a seam like this. But I've almost got this glove already pretty well secured. And once it's all sewn and everything, it's just a matter of some light trimming, because you don't want these two layers to be too layered up. You can see on the bottom, I've already cut it a little bit, but I'm probably going to trim closer to that initial seam, just so that it's not, you know, too thick. Hindu asked, when will you make the homecoming suit? Honestly, I'm not sure. Because really, I mean, a full suit is a lot of work. So I actually thought about that earlier today, because I do want to get into that and have something to put my moving lenses in front of. But, you know, it's going to take a while. And, you know, I'm excited to do it for the stream. I really want to do it, you know, the same way I'm sewing this. Design the pattern and get it in Photoshop and get everything ready to go, so that you guys can kind of be there too, kind of help out. Camo Man asked when my website will be up. It should already be up. It takes a while to load, unfortunately, but it's already up. And Matt's asking about the stretch stitch aspect, and I've gone into that a couple times. Basically, by pulling the fabric while sewing, it allows it to stretch. Kind of turns it into a stretch stitch. It's one of the best stretch stitches you can do on just a household sewing machine. All right, so everything's starting to come together pretty well here. Just move it, I guess. So yeah, that's kind of an idea of what it looks like when it's all pulled and contracted a little bit. And so yeah, it kind of gets the look that we're going for here. I'll go back again to the reference. So it gets that, you know, layered, kind of stitched on look. And you could even go thicker around the edges to get this really embroidered look that they got. Matt mentioned the zigzag stitch, and you can definitely do a zigzag stitch. It just would look, it'd be very messy. If I were to do a zigzag stitch for this right here, I think it would be very, be hard to get it to look very consistent and not very, obviously zigzagged, basically. Like, that's kind of my experience with the zigzag in the past, is that it can kind of do that. It can kind of be a little too bunched up and inconsistent. But the zigzag is a great stitch for if you're just doing a standard stretch stitch inside of the seam. But yeah, the zigzag, I used the zigzag for years and years while sewing mine. But now I basically just stick to this stretching method of stretching the fabric while I sew. And it doesn't even have to be a lot, because this, especially for the glove, it's not, each of these seams doesn't have too much pressure put on it. Basically, where you're talking about using the zigzag, where I use the zigzag, that's typically where I serge now. The serger is really good for those areas. Yeah, I got a chance to wear this suit when I finished it a few years ago. I got to wear it to a convention, and it's really cool in person. I really enjoyed wearing this suit when I went and wore it to Starfest a few years ago. I actually have a video on my YouTube channel you can go and watch. It's just basically me standing at Starfest, kind of talking to a couple of people, and I'm wearing the first version of this that I sewed together. But yeah, people really are receptive to this suit in person. Basically, all of this really awesome shiny detail, it's like all really present in person when you look at the suit. And so it's really, I like this suit a lot. You can say what you want about the movie. Unfortunately, Sony just made some kind of deadly mistakes with the franchise in those two movies. But I think the costumes, at least, were really cool. Continuation of the cool costumes from the Raimi movies. I mean, arguably, the best part of ASM 2 is the suit. Because it's just so accurate to the comic book look of the costume. DJ Jazzy Jabba, yeah, the puff paint does make the fabric stiffer than it usually is, definitely. So if you're designing a suit with puff paint in mind, you have to keep that in mind, that it doesn't have as much stretch as just a straight up spandex suit does because of the puff paint and everything. But that really, it just means that you have to keep that in mind for designing it, that you can't incorporate as much stretch, so it just has to be in the design. You have to give it as much fabric as it needs. And that's kind of what I focused on when I was designing it, was making sure that it doesn't have to pull too far. But it can. That's the good thing about puff paint, is it still can stretch. It can, when it has to, it can stretch and go as far as it needs to. That's a tough question. Jazzy Jabba asked, who I think looks the part of Peter Parker the best in the Spider-Man movies. That really is a hard question because, I mean, he's looked so many different ways in the comics. It's like pretty much personal preference from the comics for how you like Peter Parker or Spider-Man, the character to look. So I don't know. I mean, I liked Andrew Garfield in the role. And I mean, Tom Holland, all three of them. I can see why all three of them were cast into the role. And there are none of them that I have too big of a problem with. Because the biggest thing with like Spider-Man and certain characters like that is, like, it's you. You're supposed to be Spider-Man. You're the young adolescent fan of all the... Oops. Accidentally sewed it down a little bit. Oops. Yep. Had it folded over a little bit. This is the kind of thing that happens with sewing stuff all the time, is you have something like this excess spandex on the other side, and I wasn't careful enough, and I started sewing through it. And I kind of have a sixth sense when it comes to sewing, that I just know when it feels too thick, and I knew right away that it felt too thick, and so I knew I was sewing over this little bit of excess seam allowance, which is not a big deal because this is all getting pretty much trimmed anyway. But I do need to free it. Just trim that. So you could go through and rip out all of those stitches I just put in order to get that extra little bit of fabric off. But I think that's fine. I don't think it's going to be an issue. That's just kind of how I am as a seamster or a tailor or whatever. I guess I'll pull it off a little bit. Kind of a little sloppy, a little impatient. That's always been kind of my biggest flaws with all this. It's a hard flaw to overcome too, because it takes patience to overcome impatience, I guess. It's like a paradox. All right. So I'll start that again, a little further down. Well, actually I need to pull out that thread because it's loose. Oops. Name of my website is right up here. madebymclean.com. All of that. I need to make it, I think I need to make it more concise, more of like in a bracket or something, so that it all is very concisely the name of my website. Because I've realized some people think it's McLean.com and then it's madebymclean.com, but no, it's madebymclean.com. So I have to, I think, address that in my logo. But I'm still only a couple months into this whole streaming thing. I've kind of come to a little bit more realistic of a streaming schedule where I'm out here once a week. But I like it a lot. I really enjoy being out here answering questions. Thanks, Nick Jacob. I appreciate that. Appreciate hearing from people who've looked at my stuff all this time. All right, so that is a fully assembled top glove piece. So now this is ready to essentially go into the rest of the suit. So if I were to continue right here with the sewing, which I don't think I will, I think I've covered this topic pretty concisely here in this stream. Um, but now I've basically got it. If it was dye sublimation, you'd basically have all of this just printed straight onto one piece of white fabric, so you wouldn't even have to worry about it. But this just helps with the issue of the saturated colors. Like this, really, I mean, this is just really vibrant red on top of really vibrant blue. So it does a lot to really help with that. And obviously, it's how they did it for the actual movie. So there we go. It's a good way to get that done. And you'll notice it's a little like wavy. Some of the seams are kind of wavy and bumpy, but typically that goes away once you actually have the suit on and filled with a hand and at its full stretch. But yeah, it's just such a cool design with all of the raised detail and all that. Yeah, Divan just Divan just asked about certain things on sale on the website. There's only really like patterns right now. I'm still getting a hold on orders. Unfortunately, I'm a one-man operation. I don't have any like employees or people making stuff for me or anything like that. Because basically, when you start to move towards that, that's when the legality of what all of this is kind of really comes into question. Because most companies don't seem to have much of a problem with people who make stuff out of their garage and kind of are more enthusiastic about the property and being a fan and stuff than making $1 million or something. But then when you go out and you have a company and you're hiring employees and you're actually making a living wage, then that's when companies like Disney and Marvel start to see, and they're like, oh well, we could be making that money. All we have to do is license a big company to make a higher quality replica and then send a cease and desist to the smaller companies. And you might wonder, well, why not just get the license? But that's prohibitively difficult. You really have to already be a big costume making company in order to go to a company like Disney and get rights, because you have to pay a lot of money to be able to legally sell stuff. So it's basically just Disney doesn't think there's a big enough market for this kind of thing, or else they'd have a company making super high quality movie suit patterns. It could also be that movie companies don't like to sell super high quality replicas because maybe they think it waters down the actual properties themselves. Like maybe people wouldn't be as excited to go and see the new Spider-Man movie if they could easily buy the equally high quality Spider-Man suit off the internet for a couple $1,000s. But it's kind of that's the area of that. So that's kind of just the nature of sales and stuff like that. So it's hard. And it's really hard because I'm sitting here recording all this stuff on video, which is recorded and on my YouTube page. So I have to be careful about the legality of everything. So really use this information to assemble your own print if you've made one, or if you've gotten one from me. That's great. Yeah. But yeah, so that was basically the first part in what will surely be a many-part series, because I still have to finish doing exactly what I just did. I have to do that to the other glove and then assemble the other glove pieces. And then I can basically start jumping into sewing the full suit, which goes a little quicker. Because basically, with this glove, I mean, it's its own little suit in how much detail there is. There's so much little corners and curves and edges and stuff that it really has. Oh, sorry, Mr. Toastly. Sometimes I notice when you guys comment that I haven't commented on your questions. But yeah, I get a little caught up in my explanations of stuff. But I I'd say ASM2 is my favorite suit, just because, I mean, it's the truest to the comic books. I really loved the Raimi suit back when the Raimi movies were, new and popular, and I still think it looks awesome. But now, after having so many other different kind of styles of suit, the Raimi suit kind of has some weirder stuff, and then that the ASM2 just is really film accurate or comic book accurate, and does a really good job. But yeah, so this has been the live stream for gloves. Pretty simple recap. Just cut everything, glue it down first, and then sew on top of that. You have to make sure to sew it somehow, or like one way or another. You have to sew it down, otherwise you run the risk of it peeling up or something like that. And then you just incorporate it into the pattern like a typical top glove piece would be incorporated. So that'll come in a day or two when I'm, reaching that part of construction. Because next step with that is going to be actually doing the glove construction, which is going to be a really interesting video to do, and kind of get that information out there. Game Butler, I've done a slew of different props. It's hard to kind of just think of all of them on the spot, because I don't have a lot of props that have made it all this length of time. Like, there's some cool ones. I in high school I made really cool pair of Doc Ock arms on the back using coat hangers and foam and stuff. That was a really cool project, and I wish I had some pictures and stuff like that. But a lot of projects like that. I made a District 9 arm at one point. Yeah, I'm drawing a blank, but a lot of different projects like that. Yeah, and I mean, like Batman, I worked on Batman stuff for a long time, working on like the Nolan Batman stuff, and then Iron Man. But yeah. Brickmaster asked, did I have good Halloween costumes? Yeah, my mom always would make Halloween costumes. She would always tell the story about how back when I was into Power Rangers, I was always a big fan of the Green Ranger. And then it was in October of like 1994 or something. I was 6 years old, and the Green Ranger turned into the White Ranger like 2 weeks before Halloween. And my mom always would tell stories about that, just because, of course, the Green Ranger turned into the White Ranger. I couldn't be the Green Ranger for Halloween anymore. So basically she had to do an entirely different costume. It's funny I say that though, but it's not like she did too much stuff for it. She would just buy colored sweatpants. So like if I was Green Ranger, I'd just have green sweatpants, not like anything close to like what the Power Rangers actually wore. And so that's, that kind of actually was always part of what, drove me to learn and get better at this stuff. Cause it's like, your parents, your friends, whoever helps you out with these suits, they don't care as much as you probably. And so, it's important that you kind of learn some of this stuff sometimes, because it's the only way to make sure that the quality, reaches a level that you care about. Because if you're the only one that cares, then you're the only one that'll get it there. Yeah, there are definitely other places that do suits, and they do their own stuff. Typically, places are going to stick with dye sublimation like this, where it's just this shirt here that I've got here is just 4 pieces of fabric. It's just sewn together. It's 2 sleeves and the front and the back. And it's just white fabric, but it gets the job done. It looks like Spider-Man. It has the red parts, it has the blue parts. The biggest thing is just that, when you stretch it, because of the white, the colors really start to fade. And, because it's a Spider-Man costume, you stretch all the time, crawling around on the ground. I have to go up to see what Patrick's comment was because I missed it. Hmm. Patrick, I don't understand. Are you talking about the suit that they were gonna use that they ended up just using CGI to totally go over? The Civil War suit. That was a pretty. If that's what you're talking about, the Civil War, the Civil War design. You know, there were two suit designs for Civil War. The one that made it into the movie, and the one that was the practical suit that they actually filmed with. And the practical suit had kind of standard raised webbing. It kind of had the armor detail going down the arm. It had a different spider and stuff. Just a couple of different details that it's clear at some point, you know, either during filming or after filming, they just decided that they didn't really like the suit. They didn't. Maybe they didn't like the direction that maybe it didn't seem like Tony Stark did it. I think this might be their thought process with it, because they were also thinking of how they were going to do the whole Homecoming in general, you know, at that time. And so they probably at that point were just like, well, no, it has to be CG because it has to look like this, you know, next level sort of technology that Tony Stark invented. And I think that was a pretty smart decision. And also, you know, people talk about like the eyes, the moving eyes, like it'd be cool to have practical stuff, but after watching the movie, they definitely had to be CG just because of the nature of how much they move and then how much expression gets in there. Captain Red Ducky asked how many parts are there in a suit, and typically there can be a lot. There can be like around 30 different pieces, which can be a big contributing factor for why it's hard to get it screen printed, because it's hard to have all of those different pieces screen printed. Like this, I list out on the bottom of this little key all the different pieces. You can see that's a list of all. There we go. Jeez, get it flat. All the different pieces right there, and there are a lot of like optional pieces, but yeah, there's like 40 different pieces right there. And some of them are pretty small, but I mean, each of them has their own shape and pattern and everything. So I put a lot of time into designing these patterns and getting all of the textures and everything. Super time consuming just because of that fact that there are like 40 different pieces. And yeah, it can be costly to get a suit. Because it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time and effort to put one of these suits together. And so depending on where you're getting it and what kind of detail you want to have on it, it can be a lot of money to get someone to do it for you. That's why I think if that's an issue for you, these streams are your best friend, because, you know, I'm really clearly trying to go through how to design a pattern, how to bring it into Photoshop. Eventually I'm going to get into making the pattern more of like dye sublimation ready, like adding the texture and muscle shading and stuff, and then how to get it dye sublimated, because if you find your own company or you find fabric on demand, it's not as expensive. It can be, you can get it down to maybe like $150 of the printing materials, but then the sewing is the next step that is difficult for people, because you either need a machine or you need to hire a seamstress or any number of solutions to get to the end, you know, of a full finished suit. And that's why places like RPC, you know, they've definitely got their market cornered, where it's good to just get the whole thing from beginning to end, you know, get everything. Yeah, so that gets a lot in there. Yeah, Hayden, I mentioned earlier that my favorite Spider-Man suit is ASM 2, Amazing Spider-Man 2, the second Garfield suit. But I definitely didn't like the movie. Unfortunately, I was not a huge fan of that movie, just because of some of the decisions that Sony made. It could have been better. I mean, it just really could have been a lot better, but they just got bogged down. They really, with Homecoming being out now, it's clear that having Marvel kind of have control of the franchise was a smart idea, just because Sony doesn't quite get, they just didn't really get it in the last two movies. Yeah, that's a good way to sum it up. I put a lot of time into making my patterns like custom and as close to the movie as possible, but that means that you have to put in a little bit of effort in finding a seamstress or just putting it together yourself. Just because I can't. I tried to sew together suits for a little while, but that sewing is really, really time consuming. If you've got a full list of suits to sew together, it can take weeks. Several days at least, just on each suit. And so, if you need a sort of I forgot what my point was going to be because I was noticed a comment. It kind of distracted me. Yeah, a little bit of Homecoming spoiler-ish stuff, but yeah, I definitely really did like Homecoming a lot, and I liked that kind of the villains aspect a lot too. That was one of my favorite parts, and I liked just how they explained how you've kind of got all these criminals who have all of this, high tech gear, and it's actually it can go toe to toe with Spider-Man a little bit just because it's alien technology. But yeah, so it's I really liked that aspect of it, and I liked having Shocker and Scorpion and all of that in there is really cool. And then at the end too, without being spoilery, although I mean kind of already getting into spoilers. If you haven't seen it, you should definitely see it. But at the end, there's a bit of a reveal of the new suit design, just because, I mean, it's Tony Stark. I mean, I think it's not too spoilery to imagine that he would do that. But now that I have spoiled it, don't imagine anything like a huge, awesome sequence where he has a new suit. It's nothing like that. But it is really cool, and I'm excited to get more information. It sucks because it's one of those situations where I wouldn't mind working on something like that and actually designing a thing for that. I kind of want to work on that more than the Homecoming suit at this point, just because there's already so many people have hit the Homecoming suit out of the park and really done a good job. That it's kind of when there's a new suit and something new that can be moved into, I'm always really excited about that. And the new design is really cool. It has a lot of like layering to it. It has kind of armor pieces that are kind of further out than others, and it kind of incorporates into the suit. So I'm pretty excited about how you would go about incorporating that and doing it. And yes, of course, to answer again, I definitely am going to get into the Homecoming moving lenses. It's just right now it's still broken, and I'm working through my pretty massive to-do list. I've just got a big to-do list that I've been putting off for a long time. And a big reason, why I've been putting this particular, set of streams off for such a long time is because it's really, really hard. It's so hard figuring out the best way to approach teaching someone how to, go through and assemble all of this stuff, but attacking it in a logical order. And that's why I did two streams today. I did a starter stream that was all about, just dye sublimation, and if you've gotten a print, what to do with the print, and, where to go with that, and puff painting. It was a little shaky. I'll admit it wasn't the best in the world, but I'll probably rehash that information over and over and over. But that's part of why this is all taken me so long, and why homecoming is taking me, the tutorial for that is taking me a long time, just because I've got a really massive to-do list with a couple of things on that to-do list that are just like super challenging for me. And I have a bad tendency to kind of put stuff like that off when it's a high enough challenge. It's gonna end pretty soon here. I've been going for about 2 hours, and had a pretty nice little chat session here at the end. Yeah, DJ Jazzy Jabba just said, how to do Venom. Jump in a vat of Vantablack. Vantablack is super expensive. A vat of Vantablack would probably cost like billions of dollars. And then it's also super carcinogenic apparently too, because it's just carbon fiber or something, or carbon nanotubes or something all stuck onto their ends. And so it's a lot of just like loose carbon nanotubes. And so like if you touch a Vantablack, apparently it's not good for you at all. So it'll be a long time before we see any Vantablack applications out in the real world. Yeah, I do need to do dinner soon. Although I ate before the streams earlier, because I knew that I was going to be streaming for a long time. But yeah, I'm going to be back again soon. If not tonight, then early tomorrow, because over the next couple days, I need to go through the next couple steps of the suit. So the next step will be moving on to putting pieces together, because this was one type of piece to put together, like the glove, putting all these red and blue pieces together. Another type of putting pieces together is going to be like the leg. The leg has the red stripe that goes up the side. That needs to be sewn into the two leg pieces, the two blue leg pieces. So we'll be doing that kind of stuff and assembling pieces. And then once the bigger pieces are all assembled, you've got like the leg piece all assembled and the glove piece all assembled. That's when you attach them, to the torso piece, and you have your larger pieces coming together. So that'll kind of be the plan for going onward. Jazzy Jabba, yeah, I've seen, they've been talking about that kind of like gecko pad technology for ages. It'll be really crazy when they actually are capable of doing that. And I mean, it's crazy how geckos are able to stick to walls, with their hands in the pads. It's such a struggle that you wouldn't, I mean, if you think of sticking something sticky to a brick wall, you would just pull away a lot of dirt and debris and stuff, and it wouldn't be sticky anymore. So it's hard to think of like how something like that would work. So it'd be really cool to actually do something like that. Devan asked if I have a Twitter account. I do. I have two. I have Made by McLean and McLean Krieger, but I just don't ever tweet. I don't see how that's very much different than like Instagram or Facebook. It's kind of just another level to that social media. I've always struggled with like the social media aspect of like when to share and where to share it, and you really run the risk of inundating everyone around you with stuff. Like if you're just always sharing pictures and really promoting yourself, you run the risk of alienating kind of people who don't care about that stuff. And I think unfortunately there's some people in my life that don't really care about Spider-Man stuff, and kind of like blocked me on Facebook just because I post so much Spider-Man stuff. So it's kind of a balancing act doing that, and social media. There's just so many different programs and stuff. Social media sites. It's difficult to decide how to handle all that stuff. I even have like websites bookmarked that handle all of the social media aspects kind of in one grouping, but it still is kind of difficult. Yeah, Jazzy Jabba, on my homecoming mask that I did puff paint webs. Just kind of quick, because I just needed a temporary mask. there are already changes, because if you look at my mask video, it's kind of bunched up around the edges and a little rough right there. And so there's some changes I need to make to my mask pattern. But I think it'd be pretty cool to refine my mask pattern and then get a screen printed mask going. Maybe find someone out there willing to help out with that, and then get a nice looking homecoming texture going. Because I had, if you guys were paying attention a few months ago, I had a mask in progress with a really cool, accurate looking material that I got from Fernando. It's actually right here. So basically, I had this really cool mask in progress. It has the dimension and it has the texture and the puff paint and everything. But the problem is that the fabric just isn't quite stretchy enough. And, I basically cut and glued all this stuff together. And so I want to go ahead and get a mask pattern ready for for screen printing, so that I can kind of do the exact same thing, but just have it be bigger, solid pieces of fabric, so it's not doesn't lose as much stretch as that one did. Oh, that's weird. I wonder why that's the case. Well, anyway, I've done basically what I came here to talk about with assembling the ASM1 print, so I'll probably go ahead and end it on that note. But once again, I'll probably be back, potentially even later tonight or tomorrow. I've kind of got a deadline with finishing sewing this suit, but I also need to film these live streams because a lot of people are really confused about certain aspects, like how to assemble these glove pieces and things like that. So that's basically why I'm going to be coming back over and over the next couple days, just to get this done and get the information out there. Thanks for tuning in. If you haven't already, if you're just watching randomly, I would love it if you would hit the subscribe button. More subscribers, the better, as far as YouTube analytics is concerned, I guess. And then you get a little notification every time I go live, and that helps a little bit because I don't always advertise these live streams. Just so you know, my time stream is Pacific time, Pacific Standard Time. So, it's almost 8 o'clock for me right now, 8 o'clock p.m. And, I try to keep that in mind, but I know that, for you East Coasters, it's late right now. So just another reason to probably go ahead and call it there. But thank you for tuning in. If you've been here all the way to the end, hope it was informative and you took something away from it. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and thanks for watching.